Things just took a shocking turn in Pittsburgh as the Pittsburgh Steelers are looking to add another offensive weapon that could totally change their offense. My name is Peyton Kleppe, and on today's episode of Steelers Digest, we'll be breaking down the latest Pittsburgh Steelers reports and analysis regarding the Pittsburgh Steelers football team. The Steelers have been linked to add another offensive weapon. Another name has been linked to the team. If you guys are not already currently subscribed to the channel, click that subscribe button down below. We are trying to get to 3,000 subscribers. In an article that was recently dropped by Caleb Skinner, rumors have grown surrounding the Commanders, Terry McLaurin, and the Patriots. But, another team that could swoop in there at the last minute is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Obviously, Terry McLaurin and the Washington Commanders have been in a little bit of contract discussions throughout this offseason, but Terry McLaurin has been very unhappy with his current contract situation after posting consistency and back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. This guy made the Pro Bowl last year with over 1,000 yards, multiple touchdowns, and the Commanders have decided that they don't want to pay him, and McLaurin has been very frustrated with his current contract situation. He's been very vocal about the situation, saying, they have not discussed a current contract in months, and he feels very disrespected. A major team that has been linked to this trade is the Patriots, but, the Steelers have shown this offseason that they're not afraid to make big trades. They're not afraid to dish out players and picks. We do look at that Minkah Fitzpatrick trade. That was a surprise to probably everybody in the Steelers fan base. Minkah was a beloved player on our defense, but he was not producing for the money we were paying him. And, if we look at a guy like Terry McLaurin, he has been Mr. Consistent since coming out of Ohio State. And I believe 2019, 2020, he was a third-round pick by the Commanders, and he's only been a model player for their team, posting consistent stats. And, other than this offseason, he's kept his mouth shut, been well-behaved on and off the field. He's been a great player. So the Pittsburgh Steelers have been linked to a ton of other wide receivers this offseason. Names like Gabe Davis, Brandon Ayuk once again, little Mike Tomlin, and some other guys. I believe another guy was Juwan Jennings, who the Pittsburgh Steelers were in talks to trade for, but I do believe that the 49ers will lock him down on a contract. But the Commanders have not shown that they will be willing to pay Terry McLaurin, so I would keep our eyes out on the situation, because Washington and their star wide receiver have not been able to agree on a long-term extension, and McLaurin is looking for top receiver money, as he should, while the Commanders are looking for a hometown discount, and this has definitely made a big discourse between the two parties, and McLaurin's been sitting out of mandatory minicamp. I don't know if he will be attending team's training camp, but I think this is definitely a situation to monitor. The Pittsburgh Steelers have shown they're willing to pay offensive and defensive guys this offseason. So Mike Tomlin and Omar could look to swoop in and pick up a guy like McLaurin, who, like I said, has been a model player. I think he would fit in very well for the Pittsburgh Steelers. If we do slot him at that wide receiver number 2 position, we're looking at two great wide receivers that could contend against teams like the Bengals, teams like the Ravens, and some of those other top contending AFC teams, like the Chiefs, the Bills as well. We would put ourselves in a great position with a Hall of Fame quarterback, DK Metcalf at that wide receiver number 1 position. And then if we throw in Terry McLaurin at that number 2 position, we're going to have two guaranteed 1,000-yard receivers, two guys that have shown that they're leaders on their teams, and two guys that have been able to produce since coming into the league. The biggest discrepancy would be whether or not the Pittsburgh Steelers would be willing to pay this guy top money. We have dished out a long-term contract to a guy like DK Metcalf earlier this offseason. We paid him, I believe it was $150 million for 5 years, paid him around $33 million a year. He's one of the top 5 highest-paid wide receivers in the National Football League at the moment, so that would be, the biggest question mark around the situation, whether or not the Pittsburgh Steelers would be willing to pay a guy like Terry McLaurin. He is demanding top receiver money, and that's really why the Patriots have been the top team. They got a ton of cap space. And they have been able to dish out a lot of big contracts this offseason, but I do believe the Steelers would be another team that would at least make a call, would at least offer, something on the table to the Commanders and see whether or not they would accept the trade. The Commanders would likely want to send this guy out of the NFC. They wouldn't want to keep him in the division or, trade him to another team in the NFC that would, potentially play against them. So the Pittsburgh Steelers could look to swoop in, could look to add another offensive playmaker in Terry McLaurin. I do like Terry McLaurin. This guy's been great since coming into the league. And, pair him up with a guy like Aaron Rodgers. It's going to be probably the best quarterback he's had since coming into the league. Obviously, Jaylen Daniels had a great year last year, but there's going to be a lot of question marks going into his second year, whether or not he really is that guy in Washington. There was a lot of games last year where he really just played well in those one-score games and those comeback games. There was the game against the Chicago Bears where he had that Hail Mary pass. But, it's really going to be a lot of question marks surrounding Jaylen Daniels and the Commanders as we go into next year because they also are in a very tough division. They do have to play teams like the Eagles twice a year, teams like the Cowboys twice a year, who both have great rosters. Obviously, the Eagles just came off a Super Bowl win with a super loaded roster, super loaded offense, best running back in the league. One of the good quarterbacks in the league, really doesn't have to use his arm much. In Jalen Hurts, great offensive line, and two great wide receivers in A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. We look at the Cowboys. They have a pretty good quarterback in Dak Prescott, who's been able to show he can put up numbers in the regular season. Really has not had too much playoff success. Definitely has dealt with his fair share of injuries, but definitely an above-average quarterback. And they have two great wide receivers in guys like CeeDee Lamb and obviously our old buddy George Pickens, who we did send over to the Cowboys for a third round and I believe a fifth or sixth round pick as well. But, the Commanders will have to look to pay a lot of the guys on their roster. They did just add another veteran in Von Miller, another edge rusher who could look to produce next year, but obviously they did have to pay him. They do have to pay some of those other defensive stars. They will look to have to pay Jaylen Daniels sooner rather than later, who will probably demand a pretty big contract, probably around $40 million. That's the market for top quarterbacks in the league at the moment. So, moving on from a guy like Terry McLaurin could be realistic for the Commanders if they don't think that, hey, this guy's going to be too good for the next coming years. I believe he's in the middle of his 20s, so probably around 26, 27. So they could look to move on from him. They did add a guy in Deebo Samuel who people like to clown on, call him a little big, but he is a consistent wide receiver who has shown he can produce in the past. So the Steelers could look to swoop in, offer some of these picks that we do have. We do have 12 picks in next year's draft. If we do count the compensatory picks we're getting from guys like Najee Harris, Dante Jackson, Justin Fields, Russell Wilson. So Steelers could look to put a little package together, make an offer to the Commanders and maybe bring in Scary Terry to our team. But unfortunately, that's all I have for you guys today on Steelers Digest. If you guys aren't already currently subscribed to the channel, click that subscribe button down below. Thank you so much. Here we go, Steelers.